So the government's committed to spending 5% of GDP on defence. Is that something you welcome?
I mean, in principle, the fact that NATO has announced this new target and that other countries in particular are going to spend more is fantastic. My big worry about what this means for the UK is we just don't know the detail. I was both a Treasury Minister and a Defence Minister, and in the MOD, they want to know that the Treasury has actually got a plan, because you can't spend money unless you know the Treasury's accounted for it. And at the moment, we only know the actual spend figure up to 2029. We don't know anything beyond that. So all of these things are great, but are they actually going to happen?
The 5% as well is obviously an increase on the 3.5% that the government originally committed to. And I was interested in looking at the detail of it, because 1.5% of that 5 is on national resilience.
Yes.
Do you think that's right, or do you think it should all be on the core defence?
So I think this is classic smoke and mirrors. I mean, this National Resilience Fund, as we understand, I mean, the Prime Minister on another channel yesterday said that money is already being spent. Well, it's not in the defence budget, so that must mean it's things like, I presume, broadband and energy and so on. We don't yet know. We want to see the detail. But that feels to me like a bit of a cheap play, quite frankly. That money needs to be in the defence budget. If it was really 5%, that's 1985 when we spent 5% GDP on defence. We had 330,000, regular personnel. We had, I think, 600 or so combat planes, a vastly bigger military. Whereas this 5%, people will hear that and think, wow, a bigger military. Whereas in reality, the 1.5% is stuff we're already spending now, so you won't see any difference. And the 3.5% is actually going to be only guaranteed to be about 2.4, because we don't know how they're going to pay for the rest of it.
At the same time, though, you have to have some sympathy with the Treasury and with the government here as well, because, look, every department is crying out.
The money's got to come from somewhere.
We're all paying an awful lot of money in taxation, right? So you've been the Treasury Minister. Yes, it's easy to shout from the sidelines, whether you are a military man or an opposition MP. They've got to work it out, right?
The thing is, Sophie, I'm not shouting from the sidelines. I'm a patriot. I want the country to spend more. I want our armed forces to be stronger, because I genuinely worry about the threat we face. But it has to be said, by their own admission, they have no plan to spend any of this, where this money is going to come from. And you're right, it has to come from somewhere, and we're probably going to have a pretty big discussion as a country about things like welfare.
Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. But just on defence, the former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has said today this announcement of new UK jets carrying nuclear weapons is not as it seems, because he's saying the jets wouldn't be carrying UK weapons, they'd carry American weapons, so that wouldn't make us safer. I mean, do you agree with Ben Wallace there?
Well, obviously, I'm a massive fan of Ben Wallace. I worked for him when he was Secretary of State. I think the point he's making is about it wouldn't be an independent, what we call tactical nuclear weapon. So at the moment we have a strategic deterrent, which is the submarine. That would be used in the most extreme circumstances that we hope never occur. These are tactical nuclear weapons. It's a slightly lower threshold, which you still hope wouldn't occur, because it would still be pretty serious. And the point he's making is it's like a joint NATO mission that we would join. Now, if it's joint, it wouldn't surprise you, perhaps, if there is joint control to a certain extent, and it is with the US. That's very normal in NATO for us. So my view is this is a good thing. It does enhance our deterrent capability. But my question would be, should we perhaps also look at whether we can have a more sovereign UK tactical nuclear capability alongside it, like we had in 1985 when we spent 5%?
I mean, do you think these are things that would ever be used? Tactical nuclear weapons?
I sincerely hope not. The reason they are there and the way in which they are used every day is to deter. If you want to avoid war, all history shows the only way to do that is to deter your adversary in the first place by having things like nuclear weapons, which you hope never to use, but hopefully stop them from aggression.
You mentioned there about welfare, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about the welfare bill. We're, of course, expecting a big rebellion by Labour MPs on that. Do you think the Conservatives should vote in favour of those cuts to benefits? Well,
as you know, our leader, Kemi Badenoch, has set 3 tests about whether she would determine whether she would support the Prime Minister. I think that's the right thing to do. You can't just give a blank cheque at the end of the day. We're there to hold them to account. And I think the really key point she's making is the first look at this policy looks a bit like a sort of knee-jerk way to save money, not a big, thought-out, comprehensive reform of the welfare system, which is actually what we need, not least because, Sophie, I think it shows not a single extra person will come off benefits and into work, which is actually the way to save money.
You see, I don't really understand this, honestly. I think that you're either for this policy because you think that we're spending too much money on sickness benefits and more people need to come off it, or you're against it because you think it's balancing the books on the backs of the poorest, right? These are two legitimate positions to have. you're setting these tests and hurdles. Just
Yeah.
can't you just be true to yourself?
No.
Why don't you just say whether you support it or not?
So when you speak to people about welfare, to voters on the doorstep, they say to you, we do need to get it down, but the people who really need it still need to receive it. That's effectively what we're saying. We want to check, are you taking, payments off people who are severely disabled, for example? I don't think anyone would support that. Where the savings need to come from in welfare, and they are substantial potentially, is getting the huge rise in working age claims for disability benefit back into work.
So that's the point. So do you support the changes to payments or not? That's the point,
she set a test, because as we understand...
Yes, her text is including not having any tax rises. I mean, you can say we don't believe in tax rises because we're Conservatives, but that's a whole different argument. You're talking here about changes to PIP payments. Do you support it or not? Because right now it looks like you're playing politics.
Well, I said she set these 3 tests. The reason is because we do want to reform welfare. We want to see substantial savings from it. But if this has suddenly been come up very quickly and is like a half-cooked policy where the only savings are from people who... We're not saying take it off everybody. If there are people who really are severe cases who need benefits, then of course we shouldn't be taking it off them. And I think the country understands that. But what we all know is there's been a very large increase in people of working age, where I think most people think after a while they should be back in work. There's plenty of jobs out there still. It's getting tougher, unfortunately, because some of the steps Labour have taken. But, I think that's where the country would be, and that's where we are. So we want to know that will be the case. So we're looking at this carefully, and I think that's a reasonable and balanced approach.
OK, when are you going to let us know then?
Kemi set the test, that's for her to say.
OK, thanks very much.